It's actually my pleasure to be on stage and after sharing with all of the amazing announcements around this room. I'm actually really excited about the EdTech Hub. I'm looking forward to digging into it a little bit more. Because the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative is less than 3 years old, I thought I'd just take a minute to just share a little bit about what it is and who we are. So when Mark Zuckerberg and Dr. Chan had their first child, Max, they pledged that they were going to give away 99% of their wealth. And so the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative is actually the philanthropic vehicle for which they do that. We have 3 main initiatives right now. So science, where the goal is to cure or manage all disease by the end of the century, so really small goal. And then justice and opportunity, and then education, which is where I sit. In education, our vision is really to make sure that every young person enters adulthood with the agency and with the knowledge, skills, habits, and agency to contribute to and thrive in a changing world. And when we mean every, we actually really mean every child and every adult. As we design for our most marginalized learners, we're actually designing for all of our learners. One of the things we really want to make sure is that as we were hearing this morning in terms of just all of these changes, that this doesn't actually create bigger divides in terms of equity. Again, as we heard this morning, clearly the future of work is here now, and that the pace of change is just going to accelerate. It's not going to slow down. And what this means is that we don't need to actually think about how we're changing learning. It means we need to think about how are we designing for all of our learners. And part of that actually means that we're working on really thinking about continuous learning. It's not like you go to school and then you're done. You can clearly see that we're going to continue having the upscale and thinking about the different needs of our learners. I've had the great fortune to teach in a large number of different kinds of schools, both inside and outside of the United States. And the one thing that I've definitely learned is that there's no one solution for education and for learning. We learn differently. There's no one approach that's going to be all of us and meet all of our needs at the same time, in the same place, in the same way, and we'll respond the same way. So what this means is we really need to be thinking differently and really understanding individual learners. Now, I'll share just a little bit about one of my first teaching experiences. This is literally my first school where I went into. This was in North Philadelphia. This was back in the early 90s. The school was a place where all of the doors were locked except for one because they were trying to keep the drug dealers out. It was a place that eventually closed because of the level of violence. It was a place where hope essentially went to die. And I had these 2 girls in my class that I just couldn't reach. I tried everything. I tried everything with the class in general. I read all my bag of tricks. I tried to make things really engaging. In fact, I showed movies that I wasn't technically allowed to show because they were rated R. But I thought they might actually connect to these kids. I would stay after school and kind of help them catch up. I created a reward system. And nothing worked with these 2 particular girls. They would roll their eyes anytime I made an assignment. They would say things under their breath, or actually not even under their breath. What's some little white girl going to teach me? And I just couldn't figure out how to get to them. So I'm going to come back to those girls in a few minutes. What I'm going to talk about a little bit today is learning science. So first of all, because oftentimes when people say I'm the director of learning science, they think that means that I am about teaching science, but actually it's about a group of sciences that are around how people learn. And one of the things that's really interesting is that over the last 10 years, in the last few years, we've learned so much about how our brains actually work and how we learn. It's definitely way more than what we knew 25 years ago when I was really working in that classroom. But a lot of this is not actually getting into our classrooms. So one of the things that at Chan Zuckerberg we're really interested in is something called learning engineering. What learning engineering is really taking something from learning how it actually works and not how we wish that it worked. That 2-hour lecture for your employees is not the most effective way to get them to learn something. And taking and using technology to really implement that at scale. And then it's a continuous improvement process. So you try something, and you want to make sure you're instrumenting so that you're continually learning and figuring out, did that work? Did it work with which learners, for whom, for what? So one of the questions I get asked all the time is why engineering? It's sort of like we're talking about learning, you're talking about engineering. Well, most fields have engineers. The chemistry, you have chemists, and then you have chemical engineers. They take what the people who are learning the science and they actually make that applicable so we can use it in our daily lives. Same thing for biomedical. We have biomedical scientists, and then we have people who are biomedical engineers. We even have food engineers, people who figure out how to package food and how to think about delivery of food. But we don't have very many learning engineers. And what this has meant is that a lot of what we know about learning science just hasn't gotten into practice. How many of you have heard of left brain, right brain thinking? It doesn't exist. So the way our brains are actually much more complex, and they're actually not divided that way. But it's something that's going to capture the imagination. And there's a lot of these things that we think that people learn this way. I'm not going to try the learning styles one on this group because I think that you guys are pretty sophisticated and recognize that they don't exist. But this one is up. So what do we know about learning science? I know that learning science is not just one thing, and that we don't enter that we don't learn in a vacuum. So you bring your full self to any of your learning experiences. You don't just walk into a math class and bring the math part of your brain. You bring all of the rest of you. And the way we think about it is kind of kaleidoscope around how to think about all the different elements that can go into the learner. And so as you're thinking about designing for education, you want to think about how are these pieces connected and how can you actually instrument for them. And I'll give you a few examples. If this room were too cold this morning, it would be hard for a lot of us to focus. If you skipped breakfast, it's hard for you to focus. Now, some of those things are, if you're designing education technology, those are things that are actually harder for you to be able to actually change. But there are some things, like as you think about designing, how is what you're doing reinforcing or tying into someone's cultural identity? How is it helping them to provide a sense of purpose? How are you helping the learner actually organize and think about how they're going to put together a project, for example? How are they going to piece these pieces together? And so when all of these things are kind of most effective is when they come together. And if all of these things are in place, it's a lot easier to actually then learn the content that you need to do. But until you're accounting for these things, it's really, really difficult for us to learn. Context is also incredibly important. Something that works in one learning environment is not going to work in another. And it's not just that we like to know how what we're learning today actually impacts what we're going to be doing later or how it fits into the larger whole. Our brains actually work better when we are able to make those connections. Similarly, one size does not fit all. Yeah. You can't come with one solution and then you're like, oh, this works for everybody. Actually, if you do design for your more marginalized learners, you are actually more likely to be able to design for everyone. What tends to be good for, and one of the classic examples in architecture is ramps coming into buildings. It's designed for folks who are in wheelchairs to have access, but lots of us use them when I'm driving my suitcase this morning and being able to kind of use that to come through. So it actually designs and helps others. And the same thing is actually true for education. As you design and think about it, all of those things actually make better learning for everyone. I'm going to share one example of how learning works. I'm going to talk about motivations. That's one of the things that often we talk about and think about a lot. How do you get motivated? And by motivation, I don't mean that you're inspired to do something or that you've made something engaging and exciting. Rather, motivation is really around what does it take for you to be interested enough that you're willing to persevere and to keep going until you learn something. My colleague, Dr. Boris Saxberg and Richard Clark, not Richard Clark who's on stage this morning, different Richard Clark, recently wrote an article on motivation with this particular model. These are really 4 barriers that get in the way of motivation. So this first one, value. You don't value what you're learning or how you're learning enough to put in an effort. I will never use that quadratic equation in my life. Never going to use it. How do you actually use quadratic equation in your real lives? Couple hands? Not many. But if you can't figure out how that is going to connect to your world, it's hard for you to actually learn this. Self-efficacy, you just don't think you can master it. I'm not a math person, or people who look like me don't do math or don't do science. Attribution, you're blaming something in your environment or someone else for why you can't do this. Children often say, my teacher hates me. But the one that I often do, and most of us do, is I just don't have time. So that would be an attribution, right? And then negative emotions. You're angry or depressed, something else is going on that's outside of that learning experience that's impacting how you are approaching them. And that will keep us from being able to focus, being able to concentrate, and keep us from wanting to be motivated. So I'm going to go back to those 2 young girls. I was in February, and suddenly the 2 of them walked me to the office. And this seems like a very, very small thing, but it was actually a big thing. Most of the kids would actually walk me fairly regularly just to make sure I was safe in the schools. But these 2 girls had never done that. One of them shyly said something about the earrings I was wearing. And I was trying to figure out what had happened. Why suddenly, what had shifted? And then from then on, these girls were my best friends. They were around all the time, spending a lot of time with me. It turned out that I had made a comment the day before about a program that I got some funding for the next year. So they had finally kind of recognized or believed that I was going to stay. These kids had teacher after teacher, substitutes, even supposed full-time teachers, but all had just left them over and over again. And so for these girls, they were not willing to invest, they were not willing to be motivated to learn until they trusted that I cared about them and that I wasn't going away. If I had understood that earlier in the year, I might have been able to think about differently about how I could engage with them, and I might have been able to reach them a lot sooner. So these are the kinds of things you want to think about as you're designing learning experiences. So let's actually kind of put this together. Once you can remove the barriers for motivations of value, self-efficacy, attribution, and mood, then this allows you to be able to start, allows you to persist, and allows you to really kind of put the mental effort in necessary to be able to accomplish this. Then we enter a process where you start practicing. You start testing yourself, quizzing yourself to see whether or not you're on track, are you learning? And then you start developing fluency and ease. And then you actually start seeing the products you want. My colleague Laura often uses this example to talk about this. How many of you have ever intended to drive to point A, and then ended up in point B? And can't remember how you got there. So a lot of hands, most of us have done that. So here's my question for you. Who was driving? Clearly you got there, and clearly you were. But it's sort of an interesting thing about how our brains work. Once something actually reaches this level of fluency and ease, it moves back into our longer-term memory and becomes really more automated. It's much, much easier for us. It uses a lot much less energy when something is secured there. And so the idea of once you really truly learn something, you're able to move things so that they become. It's actually an interesting phenomenon that when you ask experts how to do tasks, they're actually really bad at explaining it. Because so much of it's so automated, they don't realize the tiny things that they think about and the tiny things that they do. It's because it's just become natural and part of how their brains function. So I'm going to return, just to kind of think about learning engineering. So as many of you are designing, whether you're designing schools or whether you're designing products or whether you're thinking about larger training for organizations, again, you want to start from the research. What do you know about what works? What do we already know? Make sure that you're instrumenting and then using that technology to amplify those things. And then you want to make sure that you're using evidence along the way. You want to make sure that you're tracking and learning and growing and figuring out what's working for which populations. So essentially you're taking evidence, you're acting on that evidence, and then you're updating that evidence. And that last part's really important because we're often trying, particularly in this group, we're doing a lot of innovative things. If you are trying something but you're actually not learning from it, then we're not going to get better and we're not going to be able to share that more externally. And then I want to just kind of finish with, I had shown this slide earlier around, this is really kind of about Chan Zuckerberg's mission, but I want to just encourage all of us to really think about, as you are creating learning experiences, that you're really making sure that you're considering all of your learners, because that's really truly the way we're going to be able to close equity gaps and really make sure that we're taking full advantage